The lukewarm pasta sat forgotten on my plate, the glow of the laptop screen casting a dull light on my kitchen table. Another Monday evening, another round of scrolling through freelance job boards that mostly felt like shouting into a void. My apartment was small, quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you when you're trying very hard not to think about everything you aren't doing with your life. The phone rang, sharp and sudden, making me jump. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, assuming it was another client chasing an invoice, but something made me pick up. A gentle voice, too calm for a late Monday call, introduced herself as Nurse Emily from St. Jude's Hospital. My stomach instantly plummeted. "It's about your father, Samuel Bell," she said, her tone softening slightly. "He's taken a turn for the worse. The doctors, they don't think he'll make it through the night." I didn't cry. Not right away. It was like the air got sucked out of the room, leaving just the dull hum of my refrigerator and the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs. My fork clattered onto the plate. There's this weird stillness that washes over you when you hear news like that, a kind of eerie calm before the real grief arrives. It settles deep in your bones, your body bracing itself before your mind can even fully process the words. I mumbled thank you, hung up, and just stared at the wall for a solid minute. Then, I moved on autopilot. Threw on the nearest hoodie, grabbed my car keys, and headed for the door. The drive across town felt endless. The street lights blurred, and every red light was a fresh stab of guilt for all the missed phone calls, the postponed visits, the silence that had grown between us over the years. The silence that started the day Deborah came into our lives. My dad, Samuel, raised me alone after my mom died when I was 7. Those were the good years. Sundays were for messy pancake battles in the kitchen. Weekends meant exploring dusty antique shops or building epic pillow forts in the living room. He taught me how to change a tire, how to look people in the eye, and how to believe I could build anything I could imagine, just like he did with his architecture. We were a team. Everything shifted when I was 14 and Deborah entered the picture. She was polished, beautiful, and utterly exhausting. Not overtly cruel at first, just critical. My clothes were never quite right. My interests, especially my art, were cute but impractical. My opinions were often met with a thin, dismissive smile. She had a way of making me feel like a clumsy, unwanted interruption in their perfect, new life. And the worst part? My dad, the man who saw me so clearly before, started to fade. He'd laugh nervously when Deborah made a cutting remark about my art school dreams. He'd tell me I was too sensitive when I tried to talk to him about how I felt. Slowly, painfully, I started pulling away. Moved out at 20, visits became sparse. Phone calls felt strained, especially if Deborah answered. It wasn't that I stopped loving him, I just couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Still, I tried. I called, I sent cards. When I heard he'd been hospitalized a couple of months back, I drove down ready to sit with him, maybe try to bridge the gap. But Deborah met me at the door, all forced politeness and firm boundaries. "He's really not up for visitors, Riley. He needs his rest. You should give him space." So I left, convinced she was right, feeling the familiar sting of being shut out. Now, driving through the wet streets, that memory felt like a physical ache in my chest. Stepping into the ICU felt like entering another world. It smelled of disinfectant and hummed with the low thrum of machines. It was quiet, reverent. I spotted my father instantly. Samuel Bell, the man who designed soaring buildings, now looked so small and fragile against the white sheets. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow and uneven. I walked to his bedside, my legs feeling like lead. I reached for his hand. It was cool, papery. I whispered, "Dad, I'm here." His thumb moved slightly against mine, a tiny, familiar gesture. For a second, I thought I saw the corner of his mouth lift. A faint smile. It was enough to make the carefully constructed dam behind my eyes threaten to break. I pulled a chair closer, sat down, and just held his hand, gently stroking his knuckles with my thumb, like I used to do when I was small and needed comfort. The quiet lasted for maybe 20 minutes. It was a fragile peace, a pocket of time that felt outside the years of distance and misunderstanding. Then I heard them. Click, click, click. The unmistakable sound of Deborah's heels approaching down the hall. She swept into the room like she owned it, which, in her mind, she did. Expensive coat, perfectly styled hair, deep red lipstick, and a cloud of overpowering perfume that seemed utterly wrong in this sterile environment. She didn't look tired or distraught. She looked composed, like she was arriving for an important meeting. She glanced at me, then at Samuel, then back at me. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held that familiar, cold disapproval. She didn't say anything at first. Just set her designer handbag carefully on the side table and straightened the blanket on my father's bed, a meticulous performance of wifely devotion. She adjusted his pillow, smoothed his hair, every movement deliberate, marking her territory. Then she turned to me fully. Her voice was low, steady, chillingly calm. "Well, look who finally decided to show up." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, my gaze fixed on my father's face, on the gentle rise and fall of his chest. I was silently, desperately, willing him to hang on. Deborah sighed dramatically, as if my very presence was an inconvenience. "He's been asking for you, but not in the way you're probably thinking." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "He told me he regretted a lot of things. Mostly, wasting energy trying to fix someone who just didn't want to be fixed." My jaw clenched. The unfairness of it, the twisted narrative, was so typical Deborah. Over the years, I learned that engaging with her, trying to correct her version of reality, was pointless. She didn't want a conversation. She wanted a fight. She wanted to provoke me, to make me react, to prove I was as unstable or emotional as she clearly believed. She took a step closer, standing now between my chair and the head of the bed. "He tried so hard with you, Riley. But you were always difficult. Moody. Ungrateful. You had everything, and you still acted like a victim." Each word was a small cut. I focused on my father's hand in mine. It felt cool and still. I wasn't sure if he could even hear her if he was aware. That thought hurt more than anything she was saying. Then came the final blow. The one I knew was coming, delivered with casual, surgical precision. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it landed like a hammer. "You were his biggest disappointment." It wasn't just the words. It was the complete absence of emotion in her voice, the almost satisfied glint in her eyes. Like she'd held onto that line, polished it, and waited for this exact moment to use it. I looked up at her then, really looked. No grief, no sadness. Just a cold, hard bitterness and that hint of triumph. I wanted to scream, to tell her she had no idea, that she was the one who had poisoned everything. But I stayed silent. I wouldn't give her that power, that satisfaction. Instead, I just looked back down at my father, tracing the lines on his hand, willing him to squeeze back. Deborah chuckled softly, a dry, humorless sound. "Of course. You won't defend yourself. You never do. Always the silent martyr." She moved away from the bed and settled into a chair in the corner, crossing her legs elegantly, observing me with that same critical gaze she'd had for years. A few minutes later, the door opened quietly again. It was Chloe, my best friend. She walked in slowly, her eyes taking in the scene. Deborah in the corner chair, me by the bed, the heavy atmosphere. She didn't say anything, just came over, squeezed my shoulder tightly as she passed, and sat in a chair near me. Chloe knew. She'd heard the stories, seen Deborah's act at family gatherings, listened to me pour out my frustration and hurt over the years. Her quiet presence was a lifeline. We sat there, the three of us, in a charged silence broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and my father's shallow breaths. I held his hand, praying, hoping, just being there. And then he stirred again. His eyelids fluttered, his head turned slightly towards me. His breathing hitched, then smoothed out. A faint sound escaped his lips, barely a whisper. "Riley." I leaned in instantly, my heart leaping. "I'm here, Dad. I'm right here." A flicker of recognition crossed his face. He smiled, just a little. It was weak, but it was real. And in that smile, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Clarity, a touch of regret, and undeniable love. Deborah surged forward from her chair, trying to lean in, too, to get his attention. But his eyes were fixed on mine. He tried to say more, his lips moving, but no sound came out. Just a long, slow, final exhale. The monitor flatlined. A harsh, continuous tone. The nurses rushed in, working quickly, efficiently. Nurse Emily was among them. After a moment, she straightened up, her face somber, and quietly announced, "Time of death, 9:16 p.m. Deborah stepped back, pressing a hand to her chest, her other arm wrapped around herself. She looked like the picture of grief, but her face was carefully blank, except for that quick, assessing glance in my direction, confirming her perceived victory. I felt like I was moving through water, everything muffled and distant. The room, the people, the sounds, it was all a blur. But amidst the numbness, I felt it. The solid weight of the envelope in the pocket of my hoodie. The one my father had pressed into my hand just a couple of weeks ago during that brief, awkward visit Deborah had cut short when he'd managed a moment alone with me. His eyes had been so urgent, so clear despite his illness. "Riley, listen carefully," he'd whispered, pressing the envelope into my palm. "Take this. Don't open it until you see Mr. Sterling. Trust me. He will speak for me." His voice echoed in my mind. "Trust me. He will speak for me." So I stood up. I kissed his forehead one last time. I told him I loved him. And I walked out of that room, leaving Deborah standing there with her carefully crafted grief and her assumption that she had won. Because I knew, deep down, she hadn't. Not yet. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements that Deborah meticulously orchestrated, casting herself as the heartbroken widow while subtly excluding me from any meaningful decisions. She posted saccharine tributes on social media, complete with photos of her and my dad, none of which included me. The comments poured in, "Such a beautiful couple, true soulmates," and like a gut punch, "Hope Riley is supporting you through this difficult time, Loretta." I turned off my phone, unable to stomach the performance. Chloe stayed close, a quiet anchor in the storm. She helped me navigate the awkwardness of the visitation, where Deborah held court, accepting condolences with practiced grace. Mrs. Gable, our old busybody neighbor, was there, clucking sympathetically over Deborah's apparent devastation, completely buying the act. I felt invisible, a ghost at my own father's memorial. It was at the funeral home, amidst the hushed tones and perfumed air, that I saw Mark. Mark had been my dad's assistant for 20 years, loyal and quiet. He caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Later, while Deborah was distracted, Mark found a moment to speak quietly to Chloe. He confirmed that my father had been working on some important personal matters with him in the weeks before he was hospitalized, including updating documents with Mr. Sterling. He mentioned my father had entrusted him with something important to get to Riley. Chloe, sensing the significance, arranged to meet him later that day. That evening, Chloe came to my apartment. She handed me a thick envelope. "Mark gave this to me," she said softly. "He said your dad asked him to make sure you got it safely. He also said that your dad was very clear about his wishes. Very deliberate." I took the envelope, recognizing it instantly. This was the one my father had pressed into my hand at the hospital a couple of weeks ago, the one he wanted me to wait to open. But Mark's message and Chloe's presence felt different. It felt like permission, or perhaps the time was finally right. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the flap. Inside, there was the short, handwritten note I'd glimpsed before. "Riley, trust Mr. Sterling. Let him speak for me. The truth will set things right. Be strong." Below, it was a thicker document, sealed, marked to be opened only by Mr. Elias Sterling. Reading my father's note again, seeing his familiar handwriting, solidified my resolve. Despite the years of distance, despite his failures to stand up for me, in the end, he had planned, he had acted. He wanted me to trust him one last time. And I would. The day of the will reading felt like the culmination of years of unspoken tension. Chloe drove me to the law offices of Sterling and Stone LLP. My stomach was a knot of nerves, but seeing Chloe's steady profile beside me helped. We walked into the elegant, quiet building. The air felt heavy formal. Deborah was already there when we arrived. She was dressed impeccably in a black pantsuit, pearls, her hair perfect. She exuded an aura of calm sophistication, the picture of the grieving widow preparing for the inevitable formalities. She wasn't alone. Beside her sat a woman I didn't recognize, impeccably dressed as well, looking supportive but slightly detached. This must be Sadie, her friend. Deborah smiled politely at the receptionist, confirming her arrival, her voice smooth and controlled. It was a performance, curated for anyone watching. Mr. Sterling entered the room shortly after we were seated. He was an older gentleman, with kind but shrewd eyes and a calm, measured demeanor. He greeted us all politely. "Thank you for coming. We are here today to read the last amended will of Mr. Samuel Bell." We sat around a long, polished conference table. The room was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Mr. Sterling opened a thick file. Deborah leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. I could practically hear her mentally calculating the value of the business, the house, the investments. She had spent years living off his success, seeing his name as her access to a certain lifestyle. Per Mr. Bell's specific instructions, Mr. Sterling began, his voice clear and steady, "I am first to read a personal letter addressed to those present, written by Mr. Bell shortly before his passing." This caught Deborah completely off guard. Her smirk vanished. Sadie shifted uncomfortably beside her. "A personal letter?" This wasn't standard procedure. Mr. Sterling unfolded the paper and began to read. My father's words filled the room, raw and honest. He addressed Deborah first, acknowledging the life they had built but stating clearly that he was aware of the tensions and difficulties within their home, and specifically the way his daughter, Riley, had been treated. He didn't mince words. "Riley was never a burden, Deborah." The letter read, his voice, though read by a stranger, felt present in the room. "No matter how you made her feel like one." My breath hitched. Tears welled up in my eyes. He knew. He saw it. The letter continued, turning to me. "Samuel wrote of his regret for not protecting me more, for allowing the distance to grow between us, for letting my dreams feel undervalued. I failed you in many ways, Riley," Mr. Sterling read. "I chose the easier path too often. I allowed silence where I should have shown courage. This will, it is my attempt to finally set things right. To show you that I saw you, that I heard you, and that I believe in you." Deborah's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. She fidgeted, her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. Sadie looked increasingly distressed. The letter was a direct, public indictment of Deborah's behavior and a heartfelt apology to me. It was everything I had ever wanted to hear from him, delivered in the most unexpected way. Mr. Sterling finished the letter and placed it gently on the table. The silence that followed was deafening, charged with Deborah's barely contained rage and my own quiet shock and profound emotion. Then, Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and moved on to the formal distribution of assets. As per the last amended will of Samuel Elliott Bell, he began listing the bequests. To my daughter, Riley Bell, the entirety of my architectural business holdings, the family residence at 142 Cedar Lane, all personal savings accounts and investments, and my entire collection of architectural books and materials. Deborah gasped. It was a sharp, strangled sound, loud in the silent room. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Mr. Sterling. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mr. Sterling continued, his voice unwavering. To my wife, Deborah Bell, I leave the cabin property located in Fairwater County. Deborah's face went white. The cabin? That small, isolated place they visited maybe once a year, the only property she'd ever shown personal interest in because she'd enjoyed decorating it years ago? It was worth a fraction, a tiny fraction of the business, the house, everything else. This is a joke. Deborah exploded, standing up abruptly, slamming her hands on the table. Her carefully constructed composure shattered completely. Her voice was loud, shrill, filled with disbelief and rage. He wouldn't do this. I was his wife. I took care of him. I ran our life. Mr. Sterling remained utterly calm. Mrs. Bell, these were Mr. Bell's clear and conscious decisions. The will was updated just 3 weeks ago. It was notarized and witnessed. He subtly glanced towards a name on his file, likely referencing Mark. Manipulated. Deborah shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. She manipulated him. She turned him against me. I was there for him every day while she stayed away. She doesn't deserve any of it. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just reached into my pocket and my fingers closed around the note from my father. Let him speak for me. The truth will set things right. Be strong. Mr. Sterling held up a hand, attempting to calm her. Mrs. Bell, what you are alleging is baseless. Mr. Bell was of sound mind. Furthermore, he anticipated that his wishes might be contested. He took steps to ensure there could be no doubt. Deborah scoffed, though her eyes were wild with desperation. Steps? What steps? She charmed him, poisoned him. There's no proof. Mr. Sterling looked directly at her, his calm voice cutting through her hysteria. On the contrary, Mrs. Bell. Mr. Bell prepared thoroughly. He recorded a video confirmation of his will and intentions, with witnesses present. If you would like, I can play it for you now. The color drained completely from Deborah's face. Sadie looked horrified, shrinking back in her chair. A video? Samuel had planned for this? He had recorded a video explicitly refuting her claims? Yes. Deborah spat, though her voice was trembling now, laced with fear. Play it. I want to see it. You'll see he was coerced. Mr. Sterling nodded and calmly retrieved a tablet. The room fell silent, the only sound Deborah's ragged breathing. He pressed play. My father's face appeared on the screen. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him truly conscious, but his eyes were clear, steady, unwavering. He stated his name, the date, confirmed he was of sound mind, and that he was in the presence of his lawyer, Mr. Sterling, and his trusted assistant, Mark. He then spoke directly to the camera to us. He reiterated the contents of his will, confirming the distribution of assets exactly as Mr. Sterling had read them. He spoke of his love for me, Riley, and his desire to provide for my future and support my dreams, referencing the architectural firm and even hinting at other projects he'd envisioned for me. Then, his expression hardened slightly. And let me be absolutely clear, his voice on the video was strong, leaving no room for doubt. These are my decisions. My final wishes. I have made them freely, without any pressure or manipulation from anyone. Particularly not from my daughter, Riley, who has shown me great patience and quiet strength despite the difficult circumstances created within my own home. He looked directly into the camera, as if speaking to Deborah. Any claims that I was not of sound mind, or was coerced, are false. I am fully aware of the implications of this will, and it reflects my deepest regrets and my final priorities. The video ended. Mr. Sterling calmly turned off the tablet. The silence that followed was absolute. Deborah stood frozen, her face contorted in disbelief and rage. Her whole body was shaking. She had demanded the truth, and my father had delivered it, directly, unequivocally, dismantling her entire performance and her accusations with his last words. No, she screamed, a raw, animalistic sound that echoed off the polished walls. He's lying. She made him. She always did this. She stumbled back, grabbing the edge of the conference table, her knuckles white. This is theft. She stole everything. Sadie flinched, her eyes wide with shock and embarrassment. She quietly gathered her bag and, muttering a low apology to Mr. Sterling, practically fled the room, leaving Deborah alone in her meltdown. Mr. Sterling waited patiently for Deborah's tirade to subside slightly. Mrs. Bell, he said firmly, cutting through her renewed accusations. As you have seen and heard, Mr. Bell's intentions were explicit and recorded. The will is legal, binding, and final. While you are free to pursue legal avenues, I assure you, Mr. Bell took every possible step to prevent successful challenges. Mark was a witness. The video confirms his state of mind and intent, and the letter clarifies his motivations. Deborah looked completely defeated. The fire in her eyes died down, replaced by raw, desperate panic. She slumped against the table, trembling. He wouldn't. He loved me. He did. She whispered, the last vestiges of her performance gone, replaced by a pathetic, vulnerable sound. I looked at her, not with triumph, but with a strange sense of detachment. For years, she had tried to diminish me, to make me feel small and unwanted. Now, stripped of her artifice and her expected inheritance, she was the one who looked small. "He did love you, Deborah," I said quietly, my voice steady. "But he also finally saw all of it." She spun towards me, her eyes blazing briefly with renewed fury, then dissolving into tears of pure frustration. "You think you won? You think this makes you better than me?" I stood up slowly, my legs feeling suddenly steady. Chloe placed a gentle hand on my arm. "I don't need to be better than you," I said, looking her directly in the eye for the first time that day. "I just needed him to remember who I was." And he did. A heavy silence settled. In that quiet, there was no sense of victory or vengeance. Just a quiet, profound sense of truth. Deborah made a few more choked attempts to argue, to plead, but Mr. Sterling patiently and firmly reiterated the finality of the will. Finally, with a sob of pure rage and defeat, she grabbed her bag and stumbled out of the room, leaving a void behind her. Mr. Sterling finished the paperwork, detailing the transfer of the business, the house, the scholarship fund my father had quietly set up in my name to support young women in architecture, a detail that made my throat tighten with emotion. He remembered. He remembered my early dreams. Then he handed me a keyring with 2 keys on it. "Mr. Bell wanted you to have these today," he said. One was a key to the front door of the house I hadn't lived in since I was 20. The other, smaller one, was to the private studio building behind the house where my father used to work, his creative sanctuary. I held the keys, warm in my palm. They felt impossibly heavy, full of unspoken words and second chances. Chloe stood beside me, her presence solid and comforting. Leaving the office felt surreal. Deborah's car was gone from the parking lot. The silence was finally, genuinely working in my favor. "You okay?" Chloe asked as we walked to my car. I took a deep breath, the first truly easy one in days. "Yeah," I said, a small smile finally forming. "I think I am." "You handled that like a pro," she said, squeezing my arm. "I handled it like a daughter who waited too long to be heard," I replied softly. We drove to the house on Cedar Lane. My house now. It felt strange, pulling into the familiar driveway. I hadn't been inside since the day I'd stormed out, feeling utterly defeated by Deborah's presence and my father's passive acceptance. But this time, the key slid into the lock smoothly, the tumblers clicking like they were welcoming me home. The door opened into air that smelled faintly of old wood, dust, and something else, something familiar and comforting. Everything was just as I remembered. The worn leather armchair in the living room where my dad always sat after dinner. My messy childhood drawings still stuck to the side of the refrigerator with magnets. The light from his studio in the backyard visible through the blinds. I stood in the doorway, letting the wave of memories wash over me. It wasn't just a house. It was his world. And he had left it to me. Not out of spite towards Deborah, but out of love and a desperate need to make amends, to show me unequivocally that I belonged, that I was seen. It's been 3 months since that day. The house is quiet now, a different kind of quiet than my old apartment. It's a peaceful quiet, filled with the morning sounds of birds outside the kitchen window, not the sharp click of Deborah's heels or her critical voice. I drink my coffee the way I like it now, light with oat milk and just the right amount of cinnamon. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking boxes, cleaning, painting. I spent hours in the studio, just sitting, feeling his presence. One rainy afternoon, sorting through old sketchbooks in the attic, I found boxes of my childhood artwork. Every scribbled drawing, every clumsy painting, was carefully labeled with my father's neat handwriting. He had kept them all. Later, going through his architectural files in the studio, I found a folder simply marked Riley Future. Inside were blueprints and sketches for a small, beautiful art gallery. He'd started designing it years ago, after I'd left for college, around the time I'd mostly given up on my art dreams. He never told me, but he had believed in me, quietly, steadfastly, even when he didn't know how to show it, even when the dynamics of his marriage made it difficult. That night, I finally cried. Not the tight, frustrated tears of the hospital, but a deep, cleansing sob that seemed to wash away years of hurt and misunderstanding. It made space for something new. Chloe visits often. She has her favorite spot now, the armchair by the window, claiming her piece of this new chapter with me. We talk about everything. Sometimes we mention Deborah, mostly in passing. I heard she tried to contest the will, hired lawyers, but Mark and Mr. Sterling had ensured everything was airtight. With the letter and the video, she didn't stand a chance. She finally gave up, I think, realizing the man she thought she controlled had made his final, powerful statement without her. I don't hate her anymore. The anger, the resentment, it was too heavy to carry. Living in this house, surrounded by my father's things and his quiet affirmation, has helped me let it go. It doesn't mean forgetting, but it means choosing not to be weighed down by it. I still feel my father here, not as a ghost, but as a warm, familiar presence. When I'm in the studio, I instinctively reach for the drafting pencil he always kept in the second drawer. When I walk past the coat rack, I still expect to see his navy jacket. Sometimes I talk to him, out loud, in the quiet of the house. Thank you, Dad, I say most often. Not just for the house or the studio, or the unexpected security. Thank you for seeing me, for remembering, for trusting me with your truth. I used to wonder if staying silent in that hospital room, letting Deborah's words hang in the air, made me weak. If I should have fought back harder, screamed louder. But now I know. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's strength. Sometimes, silence is the quiet confidence of knowing your truth will eventually speak for itself.